Hey everybody, welcome to Dr. Deep State. Today I want to talk about the Eschaton. There was a concept that came out in the 20th century. Most people haven't heard of it. It was called the immunization of the Eschaton. And one of the big problems in the 20th century was this concept of a crisis of modernity, or crisis of the West, or the crisis of civilization. Of course, there was a lot of great wars in the West, what was seen to be the pinnacle of civilization. And so one of the questions was why? And most of the top thinkers were looking at the current ideas and the current environment. Vogelin turned this around, sort of flipped it on its head, and he went back to the ancient world to figure out the crisis of modernity. And I believe it also speaks to the current crisis today. So, like when Vogelin did this in the mid-century, a lot of people think it's peculiar to go back to the ancient world to understand what's going on today. But that's why I want to introduce the idea of the Eschaton and the significance of it, because it takes a minute to get into it. So, somebody commented that eschatology is something that is kind of tricky for them, and I want to start out by attempting to go over a couple basics of why I'm talking about eschatology and why I'm talking about the Eschaton, to try to understand what's going on today. So I finished off last time with this idea of prophecy from the Old Testament. The Old Testament is structured. There's sort of the history and the law. There's the part with the judges, there's the part with the kings, and then there's a part with the prophets. And then that's going to speak to this idea that's been building up, that there is this kingdom of heaven, or a Messiah that's going to rescue people. And what had happened in Genesis is that man sinned, and God cursed man, and he cursed creation. So the dilemma that we're living in, according to this worldview, is that the whole of creation has been cursed, and the whole of creation awaits regeneration. And that's certainly a theme. In fact, God's first prophecy to Adam and Eve is that I have a solution for this. And in a sense, the solution is that he's going to bring about the seed of the woman. And that's threading the entire Bible. Those who hold on to the promise of the seed of the woman, Old or New Testament, can see themselves as possibly redeemed along with the rest of creation. So last time I said that there's these two paradigms that people can live in, and I said this happens a few times, with a few of the prophets, but Isaiah in particular. There's some prophecies that seem to point toward one type of Messiah, and others point to another type of Messiah. And this idea, I could go on and on and on with examples in the secular or the theological world, that we have two views, two people talking past each other with their own proof texts. And until you kind of get that this is actually how the world is structured, it can get kind of frustrating, because that's exactly, I think, what dogmatism is. People get locked into the confidence and reassurance of their own proof texts and just can't open up a little bit that the world is really structured with sometimes parallel paradigms that run with each other. Part of what I was suggesting last time was that what some of these prophecies were looking for maybe changes or signs that would appear in our time and space here on Earth, and others, and I believe this is common with apocalyptic literature and some prophecies, seem to point toward a spiritual regeneration or a rebirth at the spiritual level. And so, just kind of play that in mind a little bit. I've never heard that explained by anybody else before, but I think it can take us a long way when we dig deep into the source over time of political tension in the world. So, okay, where does a lot of this tension arise throughout the ages? A lot of it is very ancient, but some of it's peculiar to the Christian world. And I'm going to borrow from Vogelin here, is that Christianity perfectly sort of encapsulated some of these tensions and carried them through. And we're going to see it as being a sort of, not a cause, but a vehicle that's going around in times of revolution, and whether it's a recipient or sometimes the manufacturer of times that we could call new world orders, revolutions. And there's usually certain millennial or apocalyptic things in the air that are part and parcel of the tension going on politically. So one of the things that happens in the Bible is that crazy book. I don't know how much I can get into it right now. Beautiful but crazy. The book of Revelation. Number 20 brings up this number 1,000. There's going to be a reign of 1,000 years. You can go in the detail. It mentions it a few times, and that's the only place in the Bible where it's alluded to in that fashion. So, for 1,500 years, Augustine kind of said this is essentially a spiritual idea. And alongside that, even though that was the official doctrine, there was always this millennial strain that came along. And maybe I can even provide a link at some time to somebody named Norman Cohen, who went through the whole Middle Ages and went through the millennial fervor and the millennial strain. And those are the people that want to be redeemed now, in this heaven on earth, now, here, in my time, in my space, and I want to experience it, and I want the signs and the symbols that go with it. So these two things have been running parallel with each other, the spiritualized view of this millennial reign and the earthly one. And oftentimes the earthly one comes with a tinge of what we could call a golden age. And those prophecies where the lamb will lay down with the wolf, and there'll be peace and love. And so there's two parallel ones, and they're both there if you want them to be. You can talk past each other all day with your own proof text, and you ain't going to get anywhere. If somebody's paradigm is, and they need that confidence of having their paradigm to be correct, you're going to be talking all day. But what happened in the 20th century was they pushed this literal interpretation of the 1,000 years. They broke with traditional hermeneutics of how to kind of think about this, and they said, this is 1,000 years, it's going to happen. And that opens the door to, hey, what can I do to participate in this, make it happen, be part of the story? And it leads to a certain type of excitement, fervor, and situations in which, as Eric Vogelin would say, people and political orders become derailed. So, Revelation 20. Yeah, that's what everybody goes to. That's the hot spot, how you think about that. And what I suggested right now is where to point in history when you think about the paradigms. Even though both work, one is being pushed to the margins and being pathologized, like you're a crazy person for holding that idea, instead of looking at it literally. Of course, when people do the literal or the allegorical, they tend to cherry pick what they want to, and there's a lack of consistency on both sides. Okay, so I don't know if that helps clarify it any, but that's the core of the dispute. Really comes down to Revelation number 20, and it deals with different things, the binding of Satan, and this vision of seeing beheaded people reigning and ruling with the Father. Personally, I have trouble seeing beheaded people reigning and ruling. I think it's a spiritual idea. And I wasn't going to do this, but let me just point this out. The amillennial spiritual way of looking at this was refined by some great theologians in the latter half of the 20th century. I think a book that describes this just really synthesizes the amillennial view over the centuries perfectly as Hendrickson's view of more than conquers. So let me just lay the hermeneutic on you really quick. The book of Revelation is written for the first century, and you can see all those things going on in the first century that it's talking about: persecution, martyrs, and so forth. But the way it's structured is that it takes place between the first advent of Christ, the birth of Christ, and the second coming of Christ, the two advents. So it's an ongoing story. These are types and forms. Some of the types are forged right there in the first and second centuries, but those types go on and they become more intense over time. And it's once you get your head around that, it starts to make a lot more sense. The seven lamps, or the seven churches, there's 7 different shots from different perspectives of the same event. Once you get that hermeneutic, a lot of things make a lot more sense reading the book. And as long as I'm, throwing this out there with hermeneutics, this is what I believe over time has been the best developed hermeneutics within the canon of Christianity. Any text that's read, you need to read the text before and after it, but you also have to see that text within the totality and the direction of Scripture. Secondly, the Old Testament needs to be interpreted through the New Testament. Thirdly, apocalyptic literature is allegorical. When you get to an allegory, you go to something else that's, as a lawyer would do in civil law, most similarly situated, and you look and glean more information from something that's more literal in the text. So that's just a little bit about the hermeneutics. Once you do that, the whole text the Bible starts to click together. And I would like to provide a link at some point for a 1989 bit called The End Times and the Millennial Kingdom, which was published by the Missouri Synod. And it's just fascinating how it puts all this together and makes so much sense. Takes the prophecies and breaks them together. And it incorporates, it was written in 89. It was proposed in 81 because of all this Hale Lindsey stuff that was going on in the 1970s, which was the late great planet Earth. The powers that be wanted this idea of a literal kingdom, thought form going on in the world. And if you've ever heard the story about Darby and Schofield, the powers that be 100 years ago put all the money into producing the Bible, the Schofield Bible, the seminaries, and so forth, to get this idea of premillennial dispensation out there. That's the idea that prophecy, the Bible cannot be fulfilled unless there's an actual temple and an actual kingdom and an actual people there, and Christians are supposed to be participating in this. It's an inversion of the spiritual version of the story that's been accepted for 1900 years. And part and parcel, if this is kind of new to you, at least you can appreciate this part of the story where it gets wacky. This is the part where instead of the second advent happening and the judgment, which seems to sort of make complete sense altogether at the end, they have the second advent coming before the millennial reign. In other words, there's a secret, stress on secret because you can't find it in the Bible, secret rapture, where if you're the Christian and you're on your couch eating the potato chips there and watching yourself a little cable, you just get zapped up there. And I'm being a little bit mean, but it is that nuts. And it's so pervasive in the culture now. It's been drilled in the Left Behind series and on over the last 40 years. A lot of theologians actually embrace it. Of course, if you embrace that, there's going to be somebody there to butter your bread. You start talking about amillennialism, the traditional view, you ain't get, unless you got a good secure job, there's no money in it. And again, now we're at the point where you're going to be pathologized for having the view that's been there and the hermeneutic that's been there for 1950 years. So that's a little bit about the tension. But what I'm getting at is that millennial view, although it's really been embedded and deliberately institutionalized, it's always been there as a parallel explanation for people that need the excitement. Then in my own life, the big show can go on and I can be part of it. That's called millennialism. And there's been a strain of that always, and it's always appearing during times of revolution. So that's a little bit about it. And I don't even know. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the concept of the Eschaton. The Eschaton, I believe it was a theologian early century named Dodd that first mentioned this idea. The word Eschaton meaning this final redemption. It's the perfection of everything that's been cursed. And it's usually, if you're in the spiritual view, will be realized outside of our time and space. That's the idea of the Eschaton. It's what I refer to in my book as the singularity. It's how we get out of this place, if you're a believer, or hold on to the promise of the seed of the woman. And that's the Eschaton. So Vogelin, and before I go on, I should just talk about Vogelin. He's not pushed in the schools, because he's not sexy. He's not a degenerate. He's not talking about, you know what I'm saying. He's a philosopher, but he's going to, by way of talking about a spiritual problem in the West, he has to go back to the ancient world, and he does it by way of philosophy. So he's going to deal with this idea of the immunization of the Eschaton. And when people do this, and I'll try to explain it, when people immanentize, they want to bring the final perfected form down here to earth, things become derailed. Politics becomes derailed, and people experience what Plato would call a spiritual sickness of the mind that becomes a virus in the body politics. So the immunization of the Eschaton. How does it work? Okay, a bit about Vogelin. Just one of the experiences, if you read Vogelin for 20 minutes, one thing if you get any of it, your brain will be tired. He's very brilliant. If you read even dissertation secondary sources on him, you'll get exhausted. If you read the made simple version, you tend just not to get it because there's no context there for what he's thinking. So he's very brilliant. And what he came up with, in mid-century, when all the great minds were trying to think about this crisis, he flipped it around and looked at the source. Most people, and by the way, most of the best minds in the early half of the 20th century were coming out of Germany. I would argue that in terms of deep thought, Britain was a little dried up. Not that there weren't other thinkers in the world, but the hotbed of intellectual activity was Germany. And I would argue it was probably the greatest hotbed, late 19th, earliest 20th century, since the Greco-Roman world of antiquity. So it was there, and of that world, Vogelin was in the top schools, top of the class. So he's the great mind of the 20th century, of all time, really. I'm not putting him number one. It doesn't work that way. So when I say that, what he said was this crisis comes about, the current thought of the time was that the problem of the West, the problem of modernity, why everything had kind of gone off the rails, the idea was that it was sort of a relativism, a nihilism as a result of the scientific revolution. That people no longer believed in God, and that morality was kind of dead. And he said, he flipped it on its head, and he said, no, in fact, it's not religious relativism, it's religious absolutism. And so he's looking at a particular strain, and that type of relativism, or the type of authoritism or absolutism, is this group of minds that has to grab on to my paradigm, and I'm gonna cancel culture your paradigm. So that's what was going on, I believe. So he believes, and okay, I'm gonna try to explain how someone immanentizes the Eschaton. And this is a little bit tricky. But for Vogelin, he could observe this in the pre-Christian world, and he thought that it was essentially a part of human nature that had grabbed on this spiritual sickness that is in part encapsulated within Gnosticism. It had grabbed on and taken part in Christianity, eventually in the other religions too, but it has certain characteristics in Christianity. And so what I'm about to describe, what Vogelin's saying, is going to say very peculiar to your mind and like how we were raised and our modern culture and everything. For Vogelin, and again, he's coming at this philosophically, but I think he's very sympathetic to the Christian texts here. The job of the Christian, we would say, in Christian terms, you represent the Father and you spread the gospel. But for Vogelin, true enough, but the job of the Christian is that you walk by faith. The things that are not seen but are hoped for, that's the essence of what keeps it alive and what keeps the individual alive. It's the faith. But the long slog of the Christian life, individuals become challenged and their faith becomes challenged, and they want signs, they want to participate, they want the charisma, and they want to get things going on. So they start to kind of not walk by faith, but they want to walk through their eyes and ears and tastes, because sometimes that walk gets kind of dull. He said the real heroicism of Christianity are people that don't need the signs, don't need the actions. That's the heroics, and, for the kind of our culture, something screwed up. Well, what can I do about it? We don't want to hear, have faith and pray. We don't want to hear that. But that's the nature of Christianity. It's, it's not sexy. So what we have in periods of time is that people want that new discourse. They want the new paradigm. They want to get involved in something. They want the signs and symbols, to walk by sight. And that's underneath the political tension over the ages. And I can go through the examples in the Civil English War and the French Revolution, casting the Enlightenment, and our current times. But he especially was looking how this was loaded in the 20th century with National Socialism and International Socialism, i.e. Nazism and Communism. So there's a lot there to unpack that would never get to. But in short, the immunization, I want it here, I want it now, those promises. And when somebody gets that, you're going to read that paradigm in the Bible. Of course he's talking about a golden age. Of course. He wants me not just to spread the word, not just to be faithful, not just to pray for my enemies. He wants me to get involved, get political. And I know I'm ruffling some feathers because I know that this is out there. Oh, the Christian that just want to sits back and they're, you got to make it happen, Jackson. So that's in a sense what he's talking about. You want to pull heaven into frames of reality here, and when you do, you go through a Platonic type of derailment that leads to a political derailment. So that is the immunization of the Eschaton in short. Okay, what I'm going to leave you with here is what I am going to propose through the concept of the egregore, and I got a request to do a little bit about the egregore. A lot of what I've been getting are stuff that has not been surfaced yet. I've been reading, I know this sounds crazy, a lot of Christian Gnostics from the 19th and 20th century that are really into this idea of the counter-Jesus, the Adam Kadam, who's being created through an egregore. I know I'm getting off track a little bit here. But when you kind of go into this, what you kind of realize is that sometimes powers do come from God. Shocker, right? If you're a Christian, shocker. But just as many, if you're a Christian and you're familiar with the New Testament texts of Paul, we can get stirred up, we can get charismatic, and it can be from a different spirit. So he's telling, his first century readers, test the spirits, because, the devil comes as an angel of light. And so just because you're hyped up and you're feeling good and you want to clap your hands doesn't necessarily mean it came from above. In fact, it might come from what I mentioned last time, elemental spirits or angels, messengers of these spirits, or their abode. We call it the astral realm. So what I'm going to suggest here, it's kind of taking off, seeing through the singularity. There's a logic to the Bible. The tree of life is continuous throughout the Bible. It is the seed of the woman and the promise for the reconstructed world. And conversely, there's a tree of knowledge and the left-hand path and the people that want to do it through knowledge or their own initiative. That's the tree of knowledge, and they have their own singularity and their own eschaton, and these things have separate charging forces throughout history. One are people that hold to the promise and walk by faith, and the other is people that become impatient and need to do it on their own timetable through their own efforts. For some minds, just the idea of just patiently waiting is inconceivable. A religion where you get something for doing nothing, that is salvation, without doing it. For some people, it's inconceivable. That's why Christianity is so unique and so frustrating to unbelievers and believers alike, that salvation comes to those that did nothing. The only thing you bring to the table is your sin. So I'm going to leave it with that, and hopefully I cleared that up a little bit. I hope everybody's doing well. I wanted to take a little drive. The weather's finally quite beautiful today here in South Texas, and maybe you even got a little glimpse of that. Take care of everybody.